Many people say that holidays lose their magic as you get older. Well, at 68, I can attest to that. It's pretty damn true. Especially when your own kids think you're too old to sit at the same table with normal people. I've lived in Sandusky all my life, know every crack in the waterfront, and remember when our Kroger supermarket was still the family grocery store. I worked for 42 years as a nurse at the city hospital, first in pediatrics, then in internal medicine. Raised three children practically alone after my Harold died of a heart attack at 49. And apparently, that fact is what my children consider my greatest accomplishment. Or rather, not an accomplishment, a responsibility. Lester, my oldest, has always been the hope of the family. Good grades, basketball team, college in Toledo. Now he's a middle manager at an auto parts plant and lives in a four-bedroom house on the west side of town. When he calls, which is about once every 2 weeks, usually on Sundays, his voice always sounds like he's doing me a favor. Yes, Mom, we're doing fine. No, Mom, we won't be able to stop by this weekend. Yes, Mom, I'll tell Tammy you asked. Winifred, or Winnie as she prefers to be called, works as a dental assistant. She's been divorced for 5 years, though she still wears her wedding ring. To scare off the jerks, as she says. She has a daughter, Maeve, whom I only see on big holidays. Winnie thinks I'm too old-fashioned to raise a modern child. She's probably right, but I can't help but notice how she smells of alcohol when she comes to pick Maeve up after her infrequent visits. And then there's Thaddeus, Thad, my youngest, 35 years old, living in my basement for the past 3 years after getting kicked out of his fourth job in a row. I'm between projects, Mom, he says every time I dare ask if he's been interviewing. He's talented. He draws, plays guitar, can talk for hours about his ideas for startups. But somehow, all that talent never translates into something tangible, like rent, for example. And so my birthday arrived. 68 years old, not an anniversary, not a round date, but I've always loved my birthday. It was a tradition in our family to wish the birthday boy or girl good health before he or she blew out the candles. It came from my grandmother, who believed that without this wish, the candles should not be blown out at all. Otherwise, the year would go to waste. Sentimental nonsense, of course, but it was always important to me. Thaddeus decided to surprise me. He invited everyone over for a barbecue in my own backyard without telling me anything until the last moment. I only found out about it when Lester called to see if I needed to bring anything. Bring what to wear? I asked. For your birthday, Mom. Ted said he was organizing a barbecue. Didn't he say that? Of course he didn't. Neither did he mention that 23 people would be coming to my backyard, most of them his friends. People I'd never seen before, sitting on my garden chairs, drinking beer from my refrigerator, and using my toilets. Do you mind, Mom? Thaddeus asked as I walked out into the backyard in my casual house dress, completely unprepared to receive guests. I wanted to make you happy. What could I say? Thank you, darling. That's very nice of you. Winnie arrived last, with Maeve and a bottle of cheap champagne. She pecked me on the cheek, smelling of cigarettes and something stronger than champagne. Happy birthday, Mom. You look rested. That was her way of saying I looked old. Winnie considers herself diplomatic. Lester brought his wife Tammy and children, Cole and Piper. Cole, a 17-year-old almost male, mumbled, "Hi, Grandma," and immediately retreated to the far corner of the yard where his peers, friends of Thaddeus's son, were. Piper, who is 14, at least gave me a hug before diving into her phone. Thaddeus fussed around the grill, flipping burgers and hot dogs like he did it every day, not for the first time in his life. I noticed the meat was burning, but I kept quiet. It was my birthday, but I felt like an uninvited guest at someone else's party. I didn't know then that the worst was yet to come. When the food was ready, Thaddeus announced loudly, Everyone take your seats. Guests at the big table, children at the small table. I went to the big table that Lester and Thad had made up from garden furniture and covered with a tablecloth, my good tablecloth that I keep for special occasions. Tad intercepted me halfway through. Mom, do you mind sitting with the kids? We don't have enough seats at the big table. I looked at the big table. There were 20 seats, and at least 2 were empty. I think there's room, Thaddeus. Come on, Mom. The kids are going to be bored alone, and someone has to watch them. Winnie wants to sit with the adults, and Tammy's ready to get hysterical over their noise. I looked toward the kids' table. The little plastic table I'd bought for my grandchildren years ago had a maximum capacity for 6 people, unless they were 10 years old or older. Piper and Maeve were sitting at it, staring at their phones and not paying attention to each other, and 2 kids I didn't know, who looked like the children of Thaddeus's friends. Okay, I said. I sat down on the tiny plastic chair, feeling it sag under my weight. My knees rested on my chin. Maeve looked up from her phone and looked at me with a puzzled expression. Grandma, why are you here? I was asked to babysit for you, dear. But we don't need a babysitter, Piper said, keeping her eyes on the screen. I'm 14. It's humiliating. Imagine how I feel, I thought, but all I said was, it won't be for long. Let's just eat. There was a lot of noise and laughter at the big table. Glasses clinked. Ted was telling a story, waving his arms, and everyone was laughing. Winnie was the loudest, with that characteristic cackling laugh of hers that comes after the third drink. Lester was sitting next to some men, obviously co-workers, and he was saying something to them with a serious look. I sat with my back to them because I couldn't turn my chair around. It was too close to the table. My plastic tray of food balanced on my lap. The hot dog was getting cold and rubbery. Could you put your phones away at least for the duration of the meal? I asked the girls. Grandma, we're in a class discussion. Piper rolled her eyes. It's important. It's okay, Mrs. Merkel, said one of the unfamiliar children, a boy about 8 years old. I'm used to eating alone. The words made my insides clench. When the meal was over, Thaddeus brought out a cake. Not the kind I usually ordered from Lena's Bakery vanilla with lemon cream, but a chocolate one from the supermarket, with Happy Birthday written on it in shiny pink cream. Everybody over here, Thaddeus called out. Mom's about to blow out the candles. I struggled to get out from behind the children's table, feeling my knees and back aching. Everyone was gathered around the big table, where there was now a cake with 6 candles on it. Not 68, not 8, just 6. That's how many were in the drawer. Make a wish, Mommy, shouted Winnie, holding up her phone to capture the moment for her Instagram. I was waiting for someone to say it. We wish you good health, Mom. Or just, cheers, Judith. Like we always did. Like my parents did, and their parents before them. No one said, Come on, Mom. The candles are burning. Lester hurried over. I took a deep breath and blew out the candles. Everyone applauded. Thaddeus handed me a cake knife. First piece to the birthday girl. I cut the cake. I handed out the pieces. I smiled, thanked for the congratulations and the gifts. A spa certificate from Lester and Tammy. You need to pamper yourself once in a while, Mom. A scarf from Vinny. It will go with your gray coat that I've never seen you wear. A book from Thaddeus. It's a bestseller about finding joy in the little things in old age. And then I went inside, saying I needed to lie down. No one particularly objected. In my bedroom, I opened the bottom drawer of the dresser where I kept important documents. I took out a folder with a will I had made 5 years ago. The document was simple. The house and savings were to be divided equally among the 3 children. My jewelry, not much, but with history, would go to my daughters. The furniture and everything else was to be divided by agreement. I read the document from beginning to end. Then I folded it neatly and put it back in the folder. I knew what I had to do. The next morning, with Thaddeus still asleep in the basement, I called my lawyer, Bert Simons. We'd known each other for over 30 years. He'd helped with legal matters after Harold's death. Bert, I need to change my will. Is something wrong, Judith? I just want to review something. When can I come over? I've got a window this afternoon. 2 o'clock? That's fine. Thanks, Bert. Bert's office was in an old building on Columbus Avenue, a small reception area with a secretary who was almost as old as Bert himself, and an office overlooking the parking lot. So, Judith, what changes do you want to make? Bert asked as we sat down at his massive oak desk. I want to cut my children out of the will. Bert looked at me over his glasses. All three of them? All three. Judith, this is a big decision. Are you sure? Absolutely. May I ask what happened? I told him about the birthday party, about the children's table, about how no one wished me well, about how I felt invisible in my own house, at my own party. Bert listened without interrupting. When I finished, he took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Judith, I understand how you feel, but disinheriting your children is a very strong step. Perhaps we should talk to them first. Bert, I've been talking to them all their lives. They won't listen. Maybe now they will. He sighed. All right, who do you want to leave the property to? I hesitated. I hadn't planned for this moment. A charitable organization, one that helps elderly people who are alone. The house could be sold and the money transferred to them. Okay, Bert nodded. I'll draw up the papers. But Judith, I still advise you to think again. Give yourself a few days. I've already decided, Bert. When I got home, Thaddeus was in the kitchen drinking coffee. It was almost 4 in the afternoon, but he'd just gotten up. Where were you, Mom? At the lawyer's. Why? He frowned. Did something happen? I changed my will. He set the mug aside. What do you mean? I cut you all out. You, Lester, Vinny. The house and the money will go to charity. Thaddeus stared at me like I'd just announced I was going to fly to the moon. You're kidding. I'm not kidding. Mom, you can't do this. I can, and I did. But, why? What did we do? It's not about what you did, Thaddeus. It's about what you won't do. You don't respect me. You don't see me. To you, I'm an old woman who should be grateful for scraps of attention. That's not true. We love you. Call your brother and sister. Tell them. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to rest. That evening there was a knock at the door. Loud, insistent. I looked out the window and there was Vinny's car in the driveway. I went downstairs and opened the door. Winnie came flying in, smelling of whiskey. What the fuck are you doing, Mom? Her eyes were red, either from alcohol or tears. Hello, Winifred. Don't call me that. She walked into the living room and plopped down on the couch. Did you really disinherit us? Because of some stupid birthday? Not because of my birthday. Because of the way you treat me. All of you. How do we treat you? We work our asses off to make you happy. Ted lives with you, so you're not alone. I bring Maeve to you even though you criticize my parenting methods. Thaddeus lives with me because he has nowhere else to go. He doesn't pay rent, he doesn't help around the house, and he uses my house as a hotel for his friends. And you bring Maeve when you need a free babysitter. That's not true, Winnie shouted, but there was something like rage in her eyes. Winifred, you're drunk. I don't want to talk to you while you're like this. Oh, now I'm an alcoholic. Thank you, Mom. I didn't say that, but maybe you should think about why you're reacting so strongly to those words. Winnie jumped up off the couch. You know what? Leave your fucking inheritance to whoever you want. I don't care. She headed for the door, but stopped and turned around. But don't think we're gonna tiptoe around you so you can put us back in the will. We're not. She slammed the door so hard the glass rattled. I went back to my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. It was getting dark outside the window. I felt strangely calm. For the first time in a long time, I was doing something for myself and not for my children. And even though I knew there would be hard days and uncomfortable conversations ahead, I didn't regret my decision. The 3 days after my birthday passed in tense silence. Thaddeus barely left the basement, and when he did appear in the kitchen, he looked at me like a beaten dog, a mixture of resentment and incomprehension. He expected me to be the first to talk about the will, to apologize, to say I'd overreacted. But I kept quiet. I cooked a meal for one person, watched my TV shows, and pretended that everything was fine. On the fourth day, Thaddeus couldn't take it anymore. He came up from the basement around noon as I was dusting off the pictures on the mantelpiece. Mom, we need to talk. I kept wiping the glass picture frame with a picture of little Thaddeus, about 5 years old, sitting on his father's shoulders. About what, Thaddeus? You know what it's about. The will, about you cutting us all out. I put the picture back and turned to my son. I've already said everything I need to say on the subject. But why, Mom? I understand that the birthday party didn't go the way you wanted it to, but to cut us out of the will? It's too much. Too much? I crossed my arms over my chest. You know what's too much? The way you've all been acting the last few years. It's like I'm not a person anymore, and you're just taking advantage of me. It's not fair. No, Thaddeus. What's unfair is that you've been living in my house for 3 years. You don't pay rent. You don't help with the chores. You bring your friends over without asking. You're 35 years old. When was the last time you looked for a job? Thaddeus clenched his fists. I'm working on my projects. You just don't understand how the job market works now. I want you to move out, Thaddeus. What? You heard me. I want you to find another place to live. I'll give you 2 weeks. You're kicking me out? His face is turning crimson. Are you really kicking your own son out? I'm not kicking you out. I'm asking you to start living your life and let me live mine. Where am I going to live? I don't have any money for rent. You could ask Lester or Vinny, or get a job. Any job, Thaddeus. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving my son seething with rage. It wasn't the conversation I'd planned, but maybe sometimes you just need to blow off steam to let the clouds part. Thaddeus spent the next few days between rage and depression. He would lock himself in the basement or come out and try to make me feel better. Mom, you can't do this to me. I'm your son. That's why I'm doing this, Thaddeus, because you're my son, and I want you to be a man. He called Lester and Vinny, complaining that I was crazy. They both called me, trying to talk me into it. Mom, you can't kick Ted out on the street, Lester said in his reasonable tone. He'll get lost. He won't. He's 35 years old. He's a grown man. But he's always been special. You know that. I know he's spoiled and irresponsible, and I'm not going to encourage that anymore. 10 days later, Thaddeus started packing. He found a room at his friend Dexter's, the same one who came to my birthday party and talked all night about his cryptocurrency investments. I'm moving in with Dex, Thaddeus said over dinner, which I'd prepared for both of us as a gesture of reconciliation. I'll pay him $200 a month for the couch in the living room. Okay, I nodded. Did you find a job? Dex offered to help me with his online business. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I didn't ask what kind of business it was. All that mattered was that Thaddeus was starting to do something. 2 weeks after we talked, the basement was empty. Thaddeus took his stuff, computer, guitar, clothes, comic book collection, posters of rock bands. He left only the furniture that belonged to me, the old couch, the dresser, the desk. When the door closed behind him, I felt a strange mixture of relief and emptiness. For 35 years, I had been a mother. First, physically, feeding, clothing, teaching him to walk and talk. Then, emotionally, comforting, supporting, giving advice. Now, for the first time in a long time, I was just Judith. Not a mother, not a grandmother, just a woman of 68 in an empty house. I went down to the basement. It seemed bigger and brighter without Thaddeus's things. I opened the windows, letting in fresh air and sunlight. It smelled damp and a little like the cigarettes Thaddeus smoked, despite my pleas not to do so in the house. In the far corner of the basement was an old closet that Harold and I had bought early in our marriage. It was heavy, oak, with carved doors. I hadn't opened it in years. First, I didn't have time, then I didn't have the energy, and for the last 3 years the basement had been Thaddeus's territory, and I'd been careful not to go down there. I walked over to the closet and opened the doors. It smelled like old wood and machine oil. Inside, neatly arranged on shelves, were Harold's tools. My husband loved working with wood. Not professionally, he had a regular job at an insurance company, but in his spare time he made furniture. Simple, sturdy, no frills, but soulful. The dining room table we still eat at was made by him, and the bookshelves in the living room, and the frame for our wedding photo. I ran my hand over the tools. Chisels of various sizes, saws, hammers, screwdrivers, sandpaper. Everything was in perfect condition. Harold always kept an eye on his tools. In the corner of the cabinet was a jar of linseed oil, with which he coated his finished pieces. I took out the planer. It fit comfortably in my hand, as if it had been made for her. Harold had sometimes tried to teach me woodworking, but I always brushed it off. Too busy with the kids, too tired after my shift at the hospital. Now I had time, and an empty basement, and these tools waiting to be picked up again. I found a piece of pine board in the closet, one of many Harold had stored for future projects. I laid it on the workbench, clamped it in a vise. I took the planer and ran it across the surface of the board, just as my husband had once shown me. The shavings curled into a thin spiral and fell to the floor. I made another pass, and another. Gradually, the surface of the board became smooth and silky. I worked slowly, tentatively, but with each movement I could feel the tension of the last weeks fading away. Planing wood turned out to be a meditative exercise. The rhythmic movements, the smell of fresh shavings, the feeling of the board gradually transforming under your hands. I didn't notice the passage of time until I realized that the basement was dark. The sun had gone down and I had forgotten to turn on the lights. I looked at the result of my work. The board was far from perfect. In some places, I'd pressed the planer too hard, and the surface was uneven, but it was still something created by my hands, a small achievement, a small victory. The next day, I went down to the basement again. Now that the first step had been taken, I felt more confident. I found an old notebook in Harold's closet with his sketches, projects he had planned to do. Many were too complicated for me, but one seemed doable. A simple box with a hinged lid. I chose the boards, took measurements, drew a plan. The work went slowly. I was afraid of making a mistake. I checked each step several times. But gradually the box took shape. On the fourth day of my work with the tree, and almost 3 weeks after my birthday, the doorbell rang. It was about 7 p.m. I had just eaten dinner and was about to watch a new detective show. I opened the door and saw Winnie on the doorstep. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared, and she smelled of whiskey. Not a faint odor, as usual, but strong, overpowering even the scent of her perfume. "Mom," she practically fell into my arms. "I need to talk to her." I led her into the house. She walked into the living room, swaying, and collapsed on the couch. "Where's Maeve?" I asked, closing the door. "At a friend's, at a sleepover," Winnie said with a wave of her hand. Ted said you kicked him out. I didn't kick him out. I asked him to start his own life. Same thing. She tried to focus her eyes on me. What's going on, Mom? First the will, now this. Have you decided to get rid of us? I sat in the chair across from her. Winnie, you're drunk. We can talk when you're sober. I'm not drunk. She tried to straighten up, but she fell back on the couch. Okay, maybe a little, but I still want to know what's going on. I'm tired, Winnie. Tired of being invisible. Tired of being comfortable. Tired of being the one who's always adjusting, always giving in, always waiting. And that's the problem, Winnie. You all take it for granted. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand, smearing her mascara even more. I can't be without you, Mom. I'm trying. I really am. But it's all falling apart. Work, Maeve, everything. I walked over to the couch and sat down next to my daughter. Winnie, how much do you drink? Not that much. She averted her eyes. A glass of wine in the evening. Sometimes two. Really? She didn't say anything. When was the last time you woke up without a hangover? Winnie clenched his fists. Don't lecture me. You don't know what it's like to be alone, raising a child, working for an idiot boss. You don't know what it's like to be left by your husband for a 20-year-old secretary. No, I don't, I said calmly, without judgment. But I do know what it's like to be a widow at 35 with 3 children. I know what it's like to work double shifts to make ends meet. I know what it's like to cry at night so the kids don't see. Winnie looked at me wide-eyed. I never told the kids how hard it was for me after Harold died. I tried to be strong, not to show weakness. Mama, Winnie, you don't drink a glass of wine a night. You drink all the time. I can smell it even when you come over during the day. I see the way your hands shake when you haven't had a drink. I see the way Maeve looks at you, with fear and shame. That's not true, Winnie screamed, jumping up from the couch. Maeve loves me. I'm a good mother. You can be a good mother, Winnie, but first, you have to admit that you have a problem. I don't have a problem. She grabbed her bag. I came here to talk about you, not to hear accusations. I'm not accusing you, Winnie. I'm worried about you and Maeve. Leave Maeve alone. She's my daughter. She's my granddaughter, too, and I can see that she's suffering. Winnie's headed for the door. I'm leaving. Don't call me, and don't expect me to bring Maeve to you after what you said. Winnie, you can't drive like that. I can and I will. She opened the door. And you know what? Ted's right. You're crazy. You're out of your mind. The door slammed shut. I heard Winnie start the car and drive off, tires squealing. I should have stopped her, taken her keys, called a cab. But I knew she wouldn't listen. She never did. I went back into the living room and sat down on the couch where my daughter had just sat. The cushion still held the warmth of her body and the smell of whiskey. I closed my eyes, suddenly feeling incredibly tired. I picked up my phone and dialed Winnie's number. Ringing, ringing, answering machine. I left a message. Vinny, it's Mom. Please call me back when you get home. I'm worried. She didn't call back. Not after an hour, not after 2 hours. I called again. Same story. I couldn't sleep, imagining the worst. Finally, around midnight, a text came. I'm home. Leave me alone. At least she was alive. I went to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. I thought about Winnie, about Thaddeus, about Lester, about how we'd all ended up here, disconnected, misunderstood, about how I was probably to blame, too. Too long silent, too long patient, too long pretending everything was okay. I spent 2 weeks in the basement working with wood. The little box I'd started to make was finished, not perfect, with uneven corners, but still made by my hands. I coated it with linseed oil, as Harold had done, and set it on the mantelpiece. But the more I worked in the basement, the more cramped it seemed. The windows were high up, and there wasn't enough light. Harold's workbench was nice, but small for serious projects. And to my surprise, I was starting to think about serious projects. On Sunday, over my morning coffee, I was perusing the local newspaper. In the classifieds section, my eye caught on a small message: rooms for rent for workshops, studios. Old brick building on Riverside Street, former Brown's factory. Inexpensive, utilities included. I knew the building, a two-story red brick building with big windows. It had once been used to make car parts, but the factory had closed about 20 years ago. The building had been empty for the last few years until a visiting businessman bought it and decided to turn it into a creative cluster. I wrote down the phone number from the ad. The very thought of renting a studio seemed absurd. What would I, a 68-year-old former nurse, be doing in a creative cluster among young artists? But the idea kept me going all day. The next morning, I called the number listed. A male voice answered, introducing himself as Marcus Feldman, the building manager. Yes, we have a few spaces available. What are you interested in? For a carpentry shop. I almost laughed when I heard myself from outside. I work with wood. A day later, I was a tenant in Brown's former factory. Marcus handed me the keys and a copy of the contract, showed me where the garbage cans and fire exits were, and left me to settle in. I stood in the middle of the empty room that was now mine. What would I do here? Would I be able to handle it? Would I throw my money away? Doubts came in waves, but I fought them off. After all, why not? What do I have to lose but money? And what do I gain? Freedom, space, the opportunity to do something that suddenly became enjoyable. I spent the next few days moving Harold's tools from the basement to the workshop. The workbench had to be disassembled and reassembled because it wouldn't fit through the door. I bought some shelves at the hardware store and assembled them myself, marveling at how quickly my hands remembered the skills my husband had taught me years ago. Once the basic equipment was in place, I decided to get to know my neighbors. To the left of my studio was a ceramics studio, but it was closed. To the right was a tattoo studio called Needles and Ink, with a neon sign in the shape of a rose. I had never been to a tattoo parlor and felt a mixture of curiosity and prejudice. In my day, tattoos were mostly done by sailors and bikers, but times had changed, and now a lot of people had tattoos. Vinny had a little butterfly on his ankle. Lester had some symbol he'd gotten in college on his shoulder. The studio door was open. I peeked inside. The first thing that caught my eye was the cleanliness. I expected to see something gloomy, but the room was bright, with white walls with framed tattoo designs hanging on them. There was a special chair against the far wall and a table with instruments next to it. Behind the counter at the entrance sat a young man of about 25. He was thin, with dark hair in a bundle, wearing a black t-shirt that revealed arms covered with tattoos from wrists to shoulders. He was drawing something in a sketchbook and didn't notice me until I coughed. "Oh, hi." He looked up and smiled. "What can I do for you?" "I'm your new neighbor. I just rented the workshop next door." "Really? Cool." He came out from behind the counter and extended his hand. "Quinn Darnell, Judith Merkel." "And what do you do, Judith?" "I work with wood. I do—" I hesitated, not knowing what to call what I was doing. "Furniture mostly. Small things." "Woodworking? That's great." He spoke to me as an equal, without condescension that an older woman had suddenly decided to take up carpentry. That was nice. "I'm just getting started," I admitted. "My husband was a woodworker, and I decided to give it a try." "Everyone starts somewhere," Quinn shrugged. "When I got my first tattoo, it looked like a child's drawing. Now the clients sign up a month in advance." We talked some more. Quinn told me he's been working at the studio for 3 years, and before that, he was an apprentice at another salon. "Come by if you need help," he said as I was about to leave, "or just to chat." "Thanks, Quinn. I'd be glad of the company. Back in my workshop, I thought about the unexpected encounter. Quinn was from a completely different world. Young, tattooed, listening to music that was just noise to me. And yet there was something disposing about him, some sincerity that I liked. I spent the next few days setting up my workshop and starting my first serious project, a bookshelf. Not just boards on brackets, but a real shelf with two compartments and carved elements. I found some instructional videos online and followed the instructions. Around noon, there was a knock on the door. It was Quinn with 2 cups of coffee. Thought I'd drop off an espresso for you. I'm on break between clients. I invited him in and thanked him for the coffee. Quinn looked around my workshop with interest. Are these all your husbands? He asked, nodding at the workbench and tools. Yes, Harold died years ago, but I kept it all. Good stuff. They don't make them like this now. What are you making now? He looked at the spread of boards and blueprints. A bookshelf. I'm not sure it's going to work, but it'll work, Quinn said confidently. You have good hands. That's the main thing. We got to talking. It turned out Quinn knew a lot about woodworking. His grandfather was a cabinet maker in Maine, and Quinn had spent many summer vacations in his shop before he got into tattoos. You know, wood and leather have a lot in common, he said, finishing his coffee. Both materials are alive, both require respect and patience. He gave me a few tips on how to use the carving tool, showed me how to hold my hand so I wouldn't get tired. Then he looked at his watch and said he had to go. A customer was due in 15 minutes. I'll stop by tomorrow if you don't mind. I'll see how the regiment's progressing. I'd be glad to, I said, and it was true. And so began our strange friendship. Every day Quinn would stop by my place, usually with coffee or donuts from the cafe across the street. We talked about everything: work, the weather, the books we were reading. Sometimes he'd give me tips on woodworking. Other times he'd just sit in the corner with his sketchbook, drawing sketches for future tattoos while I worked. 2 weeks later, my bookshelf was ready. Not perfect, with some bumps and not quite symmetrical, but quite functional and, in my opinion, beautiful. I coated it with a dark walnut stain and polished it to a high gloss. Well done, Judith, said Quinn when I showed him the result. You're a fast learner. I have a good teacher. Don't be modest. It's your hands and your vision. Where do you want it? Home, I guess. In the living room. Why not sell it? We have a lot of craft fairs around here. I shook my head. Who's going to buy a shelf made by an amateur old woman? Believe me, lots of people. People like things with history, with soul. I didn't argue, but the thought crossed my mind. Maybe later, when I have more experience. My next project was a chair, not a regular chair with a backrest, but something like a stool with a curved seat, ergonomically shaped to fit my body. I saw one in a magazine and decided to try to recreate it. It was more complicated than the shelf. I had to saw out parts of a certain shape, sand them until they were perfectly smooth, and join them at the right angle. I made mistakes, started over, made mistakes again. Twice I almost cut myself working with a circular saw. But slowly, the chair took shape. Quinn watched my progress, sometimes offering advice, sometimes just encouragement. When the chair was almost finished, he suggested an unusual solution for the finish. You know what would be cool? Burn a pattern into the seat. I have a burnisher I could borrow. I don't know how to burn. It's not that hard. It's basically the same pattern, except instead of a pencil, it's a hot pen. I can show you. The next day, Quinn brought out a burner and showed us the basic techniques. We decided to make a simple geometric pattern around the edge of the seat. Nothing complicated, but just enough to give the chair some personality. You have talent, Judith, he said when we were done. Seriously, you've got it all down to a T. The chair was surprisingly comfortable. When I sat on it, it supported my back perfectly. Quinn tried it too and nodded approvingly. That evening, I decided not to take the chair home, but to leave it in the workshop as the first piece of my author's furniture. The thought made me smile. Judith Merkel's author's furniture. Who would have thought it? The next day, after working in the workshop, I decided to stop by the pharmacy. I needed to buy some blood pressure medicine. The pharmacy was in a medical center that also housed the offices of several doctors and therapists. I was standing in line when I heard a familiar voice. Grandma? Turning around, I saw Maeve. My 12-year-old granddaughter was standing at the entrance to the pharmacy, holding some paper. She looked surprised and confused. Maeve, what are you doing here? Are you sick? No, She hesitated, tucking the paper behind her back. I'm just waiting for my mom. She's at her appointment. I looked at the office doors. Across from the pharmacy was the office of Dr. Rachel Summers, a clinical psychologist. Dr. Summers has my mom? No, Maeve lowered her eyes. I'm waiting for her downstairs. She's in the other office. I realized Maeve was hiding something, but I didn't press. Why don't we sit in the cafeteria while we wait? I'll buy you a hot chocolate. Maeve hesitated, but then nodded. Okay, only I'll text my mom to let her know where I am. We went down to the cafeteria on the first floor. I bought Maeve a hot chocolate and myself a tea. How was school? I asked, trying to make conversation. It's okay. Maeve shrugged. The teachers say I'm inattentive. Do you get bored in class? Sometimes. Grandma, Mom said you kicked Uncle Ted out. I didn't kick him out. I just asked him to start living on his own. She also said you cut everyone out of your will. That's true, but this isn't about money, Maeve. It's about respect. I don't understand. You will someday. I put my hand over hers. How's your mom? Is she, okay? Maeve tensed up. She says she's fine. What do you think? Maeve was silent for a long time, staring into her cup. Then she said quietly, she drinks a lot. Sometimes she doesn't get up in the morning. Sometimes she yells for no reason. And then she cries and apologizes. I squeezed her hand. Maeve, do you go to Dr. Summers? She looked up at me with frightened eyes. How did you know? I guessed. It's okay, honey. A lot of people go to counselors. Mommy doesn't know, Maeve whispered. I told her I was taking a math class. The school principal helped me organize it. You're smart, Maeve, and very brave. Dr. Summers says Mom has a drinking problem, that it's a disease and she needs help. But Mom doesn't recognize the problem. I sighed. This is exactly what I was afraid of. The doctor's right. Your mom does have a problem and she needs help. But you don't have to carry that burden alone, Maeve. You're just a kid. Who's gonna help? Uncle Lester says Mama's just going through a rough patch. Uncle Ted drinks himself. And you. What about me? Mom says you're judging her, that you always thought she was a loser. I shook my head. That's not true, Maeve. I never thought your mom was a loser. I always admired her strength, her stubbornness. But now she's lost her way, and I'm worried about her. And you. Maeve's phone vibrated. She looked at the screen. It's Mom. She's waiting for me upstairs. Okay, I stood up. Maeve, can I ask you something? What is it? Come and see me whenever you want. Just for no reason at all. My house is always open to you. Maeve nodded. Thank you, Grandma. Don't tell Mom you saw me here, and about Dr. Summers. I won't. It's your secret, and I'll keep it. But remember, sooner or later you're going to have to talk to your mom about it. I know. Maeve finished her chocolate and stood up. I have to go. I remained seated at the table, staring out the window and thinking about what I had just learned. My 12-year-old granddaughter is secretly seeing a counselor because her mother is an alcoholic who won't admit she has a problem. What can I do about it? To intervene is to incur Winnie's wrath, which can only make things worse. Not intervening means leaving Maeve alone with this problem. It's been almost 2 months since my birthday. I'd gotten used to the new rhythm of life morning workshop, woodworking, talking to Quinn, evening quiet, empty house. It was calmer without Thaddeus, but sometimes I caught myself listening for sounds from the basement that were no longer there. Winnie and I hadn't spoken since the night she'd come in drunk. She hadn't returned my calls, and I, after seeing Maeve, was hesitant to be persistent. Lester called a couple times, and the conversation was polite but strained. He talked about work, the kids, the weather, anything but the Will and Thaddeus's move. That Sunday, I was working on a new project, a dresser with 3 drawers. It was the hardest thing I'd ever attempted, and I was constantly checking the blueprints for fear of making a mistake. When I heard a knock on the workshop door, I thought it was Quinn, even though his studio was usually closed on Sundays. But it was Lester standing on the doorstep. In an ironed shirt and slacks, his hair neatly combed, he looked like he was going to a business meeting, not visiting his mother on a Sunday. Lester? I froze in surprise with the planer in my hand. What are you doing here? Hi, Mom. He looked around the workshop with poorly concealed bewilderment. Thaddeus told me you rented a workshop. I didn't believe it, so I thought I'd check it out. As you can see, it's true. I wiped my hands on my apron. Come on in. Be careful. There's shavings everywhere. Lester walked in carefully, trying not to get his shined shoes dirty. He looked out of place here, like a man in a tuxedo on the beach. Mom, what's all this? He put his hand around the workshop. Why would you do that? I like working with wood, and I needed a bigger space than the basement. But, at your age. At my age what, Lester? I put the planer on the workbench. At my age, it's time to sit in a rocking chair and knit socks? Lester sighed. You know that's not what I meant. Just carpentry? Really? It's hard physical work. It's not work to me. It's a pleasure. Lester walked over to the workbench and picked up the dresser piece I'd just been working on. How long have you been doing this? A couple months, since Thaddeus moved out. Lester cringed at the mention of his brother. Yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about too. And the will. I knew this conversation would happen sooner or later. I was ready for it. What exactly do you want to talk about, Lester? All of it, Mom. He sat down on the stool I made last week. What's going on with you? First you change the will, cut us all out. Then you kick out Thaddeus, who lived with you. Now this, workshop. Are you going through some kind of crisis? No, Lester. I just started living for me instead of you. What does that mean? It means that for 33 years I've lived for the 3 of you. After your father died, my whole life was devoted to keeping you happy, healthy, educated, on your feet. And we're thankful for that, Mom. We are? I sat across from him. Then why are you still so dismissive of me? Lester looked at me as if he were seeing me for the first time. Yeah, we didn't. Don't, Lester. I don't blame you. I'm the one who let you treat me like this. But I won't do it again. I deserve respect. I deserve my own life. Lester was silent for a long time, looking at his hands. Then he said quietly, Is this because of the way Dad died? I flinched. We never talked about it. Never. What do you mean? I know, Mom. Lester looked up at me. I know it wasn't just a heart attack. I felt my back grow cold. 33 years I've kept this secret. 33 years living with this burden. How did you... I was 16, not 9 like Thaddeus. I was awake the night it happened. I heard you talking. I heard the gunshot. I closed my eyes. The memories I'd been trying to bury for so long came in a wave. Harold with a gun in his hand, his drunken, crazed look. I can't go on like this, Judith. I'm ruined. They'll take the house, everything. My attempt to retrieve the gun. A struggle. A shot, blood on the wall, and then the call to the police. My husband, he had a heart attack. Please hurry. I never told anyone, Lester continued. Not Vinny, not Ted, not Tammy, not anyone. But I knew, and I saw how you suffered all those years, how you blamed yourself. It was an accident, I whispered. I tried to take the gun away. We struggled. He shot himself. I didn't. I know, Mom. Lester took my hand. It was the first time in years he'd made such a gesture. I never thought it was your fault. You saved us all. If it wasn't for you, he could have killed himself and us. I couldn't hold back the tears. 33 years of carrying this burden alone, and suddenly Lester knew all along, and he didn't judge me. But why didn't you ever talk about it? I thought it would make you feel better if we believed the official story. I was a kid. I didn't know how to talk about things like that. And then it was too late. We sat in silence for a long time. I was wiping my tears. Lester was looking out the window. Finally, he said, "We love you, Mom. All of us. It's just, we're used to you always being there for us. Always strong. Didn't realize you needed support, too." He stood up and walked over to the shelf where my first pieces stood, a jewelry box, a little carved owl figurine I'd made from Quinn's sketch. "And you really did all this yourself?" Yes, I felt a surge of pride. It's not perfect, of course, but it's impressive, Mom. He turned to me. Really impressive. You were always stronger than we thought. I didn't know what to say. Lester rarely said compliments, especially to me. Mom, about the will. I understand why you did it, and maybe we deserved it. But, maybe you shouldn't cut out Winnie's kids and mine. It's not their fault for the way we acted. I thought about it. The grandchildren really weren't to blame for their parents' behavior. I'll think about it, Lester. That's the honest thing to do. He nodded. Thank you. I'll call more often and visit with the kids, if that's okay with you. I'd like that very much. He hugged me goodbye, awkwardly, like a man unaccustomed to showing affection, but sincerely. When he left, I stood at the workbench for a long time, staring at the piece of wood I'd been working on before he came. The conversation had knocked me out, but in a strange way I felt relieved. It was as if the heavy stone I'd carried in my chest for 33 years had gotten a little lighter. For the next week I worked with renewed enthusiasm. The dresser was taking shape, and even the drawers I'd been so afraid of were turning out smooth and even. Quinn came by every day, bringing coffee, giving advice, telling funny stories about his clients. On Wednesday, he came in with a big poster that he immediately unfolded in front of me. Look, Spring Craft Fair in the park, in 3 weeks. I glanced at the brightly colored poster, which showed various crafts, pottery, knits, jewelry, and, yes, furniture. So? So what? You should participate. Quinn was full of enthusiasm. You've already got a few things ready to go, and you'll have time to make more. The stool, the jewelry box, the shelf, the hot coasters you made last week. Are you kidding me? Who's gonna buy that? Everybody. Judith, you don't realize how much handmade work is valued nowadays, especially with a story. Imagine, a former nurse at 68 starts a new life creating unique furniture. That's a great story, I laughed. You're exaggerating. Not at all. I've already made arrangements with the organizers. They've reserved a place for you. What? But I don't. Just think about it, okay? You don't have to decide right now, but I've made a reservation, just in case. I shook my head but smiled. Quinn and his enthusiasm were contagious. On Saturday, as promised, Lester arrived with the kids. Cole, my oldest grandson, looked disgruntled. Obviously, he had been forced to go. Piper was more welcoming, although she was constantly checking her phone. Is this where you work, Grandma? Piper looked around the workshop with interest. Oh, cool. Can I take a picture for Instagram? Sure, I smiled, surprised by her reaction. Did you do all this yourself? Cole was looking at the almost finished dresser. Really? Yeah, I walked over to him. Do you want to see how the planer works? To my surprise, he nodded. I showed him how to hold the tool properly, how to guide it over the wood. Cole tried it himself, and although the movements were clumsy, he managed to remove a thin chip. Can I try it? Piper asked, putting the phone away. Sure, I showed her how to use a smaller tool, a carving chisel. Piper was surprisingly persistent and diligent. She carved a small star into a piece of wood and was so proud of herself that she immediately took a picture of the result. Grandma, can you teach me how to make something like this? She pointed to the jewelry box I'd made for Quinn as a thank you for his help. Sure, if it's okay with your parents. I don't mind, said Lester, who had been watching us silently the whole time. I think it's a great hobby, better than sitting on the phone all day. Dad! Piper was indignant, but I could tell she wasn't offended. We spent almost 3 hours in the workshop. Cole was working on the phone stand, and Piper was carving patterns on the lid of a small jewelry box. Lester sat in the corner, sometimes helping, sometimes just watching. When it was time to leave, the kids didn't want to be interrupted. We'll come back again, won't we? Piper asked, reluctantly putting away her chisel. Of course, Lester smiled. If it's okay with Grandma. I'd be very happy to, I said, and it was the truth. When they left, I put the tools away and sat down on the stool feeling pleasantly tired. It had been an unexpectedly good day. I didn't think my grandchildren would ever be interested in what I was doing, especially Cole, who'd barely dignified me with a glance in recent years. There was a knock on the door, and Quinn walked in. Hi, how was your day with the grandkids? Surprisingly well, I smiled. They were interested, even Cole. See, I told you what you're doing is cool. Even teenagers recognize that, and they're the toughest critics. Quinn sat down in the chair across from me. Have you thought about the fair? I sighed. I had, and I'd probably go along with it. After all, what have I got to lose? Great! Quinn clapped his hands. I'll help you get organized. We'll need business cards, price tags, maybe a little banner with your name on it. Isn't that a little too much? It's perfect. Trust me, I know how it works. I have a friend at a print shop. He'll do everything at a friendly price. I shook my head but didn't argue. Quinn's enthusiasm was too infectious. By the way, he said after a moment's silence, I've been meaning to ask, have you ever thought about getting a tattoo? I laughed. A tattoo? Me? At my age? What's the big deal? Age has nothing to do with it. I have a client who's 72. She got her first tattoo at 70. Now she comes in every 6 months, adds something new. What did she get? She started with the names of her children and grandchildren on her wrist. Then she added a flower for each great-grandchild. Now she has almost half a sleeve. I wondered. The idea was absurd, but somehow it didn't seem so wild. After all, I'd already done so many unexpected things in the last few months. I don't know. What would I even stuff? Something that has meaning to you. A little symbol, maybe a tool, or a tree, or something that reminds you of an important moment in your life. I thought about the conversation with Lester, the secret I'd carried for 33 years, the sense of release I felt when I realized he knew and didn't judge me. Maybe a phoenix, I said, surprising myself, a symbol of rebirth. Quinn smiled. That would be perfect. Small, stylized. Maybe on my wrist or ankle. I could draw a sketch just for you to look at. Okay, I nodded. Draw it. I'll think about it. When Quinn left, I went to the window and looked outside. It felt strangely peaceful. It was as if I'd been shackled by invisible chains all these years. Guilt, fear, the habit of living for others, and now, one by one, I was breaking those chains. Maybe Quinn was right. Maybe a tattoo was exactly what I needed. A little mark on my skin, a reminder that it's never too late to start living again. It's never too late to become who you want to be. The morning of the craft fair was sunny and warm. I woke up at 5 in the morning, even though the tent setup didn't start until 8. I was as nervous as a schoolgirl before her first exam. What if no one was interested in my work? What if I looked ridiculous among professional artisans? Quinn picked me up at 7:30 in his shabby pickup truck. We loaded all my craft stools, jewelry boxes, hot coasters, the small dresser I'd finished in time for the fair, a box of business cards Quinn had ordered for me, Judith Merkel, handmade author's furniture, a small banner with the same text. Sandusky City Park was already bustling with activity when we arrived. People were setting up tents, laying out merchandise, and hanging banners everywhere. Our spot was quite lucky, in the shade of a large oak tree, not far from the main alley. We quickly set up the simple tent Quinn had lent us and arranged my work on folding tables, stools, and a dresser on the ground nearby. Hung a banner. We put up business cards. It looks great, Quinn nodded, taking a step back and assessing the results. I'll check in from time to time, see how you're doing. In the meantime, I'm gonna go help Melissa. She's exhibiting today, too. I was alone in my little tent. The first hour passed quietly. The rare visitors were just starting to arrive. Most just passed by with polite glances. I was beginning to think it was a waste of time and money when an elderly couple stopped in front of the tent. "Did you make this?" the man asked, looking at the dresser. "Yes," I nodded. "By yourself?" He sounded surprised. "How long have you been woodworking?" "About 4 months." Now they were both surprised. "And this is after 4 months?" The woman ran her hand over the smooth surface of the dresser. "It's amazing. How much do you want for it?" I quoted the price Quinn and I had set the day before. It seemed high to me, but Quinn insisted that handmade pieces had to be expensive. "We'll take it," the man said without hesitation and pulled out his wallet. I was so stunned that I didn't immediately realize I'd just made my first sale. They paid for the dresser, agreed to pick it up at the end of the day, and left, leaving me in a state of mild shock. Things got better after that. There were more and more people, and many stopped by my tent. My work attracted attention, not perfect, but with character, as Quinn had said. By noon, I had sold 2 stools, several jewelry boxes, and all the hot coasters. A woman who owned a small gift store took my business card and asked if I wanted to supply caskets to her store on a regular basis. Quinn stopped by several times, each time delighted with my success. "I told you so." He smiled as he helped me count out change for another customer. "You're a real hit at the fair." By the end of the day, I had sold almost all of my work, including the dresser and 3 of the 4 stools. Tired but satisfied, I counted the proceeds, which far exceeded the cost of materials and tent rental. "What do you think?" Quinn asked, helping me pack up the rest of my belongings. "Was it worth it?" "Definitely," I smiled. "Thanks for pushing me to do this." I felt strangely light on the way home. It wasn't about the money, although that was a nice bonus. It was the recognition, the fact that strangers saw value in what I had created with my own hands. That I, Judith Merkel, a 68-year-old widow, former nurse, mother of 3, appeared capable of starting something new and succeeding at it. There was a surprise waiting for me at home. Lester and Winnie's cars were parked in the driveway. I hadn't seen my daughter since the night she'd come in drunk and run out, slamming the door. Hadn't spoken to her since seeing Maeve at the medical center. I walked into the house, wondering what had brought them both in at the same time. They were sitting in the living room, Lester on the couch, Vinnie in a chair. Between them, on the floor, Thaddeus sat leaning against the wall. All three of them turned to me as I walked in. "What's going on?" I asked, leaving my bag in the hallway. "Family council?" "You could say that." Lester nodded, standing up. "We wanted to talk to you, all of us together." "I'm listening." I sat down in my chair, feeling the fatigue of the long day wash over me. "Mom," Lester began, clearly speaking for everyone. "We've been talking to each other a lot these past weeks. About you, about us, about what happened." "You have?" I raised an eyebrow. "Yes, and we've come to the conclusion that we owe you an apology." I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "We weren't always attentive to you," Lester continued. "Took you for granted, especially after my father died. You were always strong, always coping, and we just used to it. You always did everything for us." Winnie picked up on that. She looked sober, which was a good sign. "And we never even said thank you." Thaddeus was silent, staring at the floor. "Thad?" Lester looked at his brother. "You wanted to say something, too." Thaddeus looked up. "I'm sorry, Mom, for living in your house like a parasite, for throwing that stupid birthday party and putting you at the kids' table." I looked at my kids, wondering what had caused this sudden epiphany. It was like a play rehearsed in advance. "What had led to such unanimity?" I asked. "You've never been so in agreement with each other before." They looked at each other. "Lester told us," Winnie said quietly, "about Dad, about what really happened." I felt my back grow cold. "What exactly did he say?" "That Dad didn't die of a heart attack," Thaddeus said. "That he wanted to kill himself. That you tried to stop him and the gun went off by accident." I closed my eyes. The secret I'd kept for 33 years was now known to all three of us. "Mom, why didn't you ever tell us?" There was pain in Vinny's voice. "Why did you let us think it was just a heart attack?" "Because you were children." I opened my eyes. "Thaddeus was 9. You were 12. How could I tell you that your father tried to kill himself? That he was so desperate about debt that he was willing to leave you? Lester was old enough to understand. You weren't." "And then?" Thaddeus asked. "When we grew up. Then it was too late. Too much time had passed. I I got used to carrying the load alone." There was a heavy silence in the room. "Mom," Lester sat down beside me. "We understand now why you did what you did with the will, why you kicked Ted out, why you started this woodworking story." "Woodworking," I corrected. "Yeah, her. You've lived your whole life for us. Now you want to live for yourself. And that's right. But we want to be a part of your life," Winnie added. "The right part. Not a burden, not a problem, but a family." I stared at them, trying to see if they were sincere, or if this was just a way to reclaim their place in the will. "Do you know why I sat at the kids' table on my birthday?" I asked. They looked at each other incomprehensibly. "Because Ted asked you to?" Lester said uncertainly. "No, I could have said no. I could have insisted on my seat at the big table, but I wanted to see if any of you would notice that something was wrong, that the mother of the family, the birthday girl, is sitting with her children in a plastic chair, with a plastic plate on her lap, that it's not right." They were silent, and I could see in their faces that they were starting to get it. "It was a test, and you failed it. None of you even noticed. None of you were outraged. No one offered me their seat. For you, it was just a normal thing. A mother can sit at the kids' table. No big deal." "Mom, we didn't think," Winnie started. "That's right. You didn't think. You didn't see me. You didn't think I was human. And the worst part is, I almost believed it myself, almost resigned myself to the role of the old mother who should be grateful for any attention." My words hit them like a whip. Winnie lowered her head. Thaddeus clenched his fists. Lester looked away. One more thing, I continued. None of you wished me well before I blew out the candles. No one remembered our family tradition, a tradition that was important to me. Mom, we just forgot, Thaddeus said. That doesn't mean we don't wish you well. It's not about the words, Thaddeus. It's about you forgetting something that was important to me, something that's always been important, because I and my feelings no longer mattered. We sat in silence for a long time. Each was thinking about something else. At last, Lester asked, "What now, Mama? We want to make things right. How do we do that?" I sighed. I didn't want a war with my own children. I didn't want to destroy my family. But I didn't want to go back to the way things were. I don't know, Lester. I can't just forget everything and pretend it never happened. But I'm not going to hold a grudge forever. I need time, and so do you, to figure out what you really want to change and what you're just saying to make me feel better. I'm going to quit drinking, Winnie said suddenly. I've already started. I'm going to AA meetings. I've been sober for 2 weeks now. I looked at my daughter in surprise. You did? Yeah, after Maeve, she stammered. Maeve told me she's been sneaking around to counseling. Because of me, because of my drinking. It was, a blow. I didn't realize how much I was traumatizing my own child. I'm glad, Winnie. I smiled sincerely at her. It's a big step. And I got a job, Thaddeus said. A real job, not a projects job. At a furniture store, assistant interior designer. It doesn't pay much, but it's a start. And I'm renting an apartment. It's small, but it's my own. That's great, Ted. And Lester thought about it. I realized I was too focused on work and forgot about my family. You, my kids. I'm trying to fix that, spending more time with Cole and Piper, and I want to spend more time with you, if you'll let me. I looked at my children and saw in them a reflection of their father in Lester's eyes, in Winnie's smile, in Thaddeus's gestures. But now I saw a part of me too, my determination, my strength, my stubbornness. I don't hold it against you, I said at last. But I don't want words, I want actions. Show me that you've really changed, that you see me not only as a mother, but as a human being, with your desires, your dreams, your fears. We talked for another hour or two. No accusations, no yelling, just talking like adults trying to understand each other. When they left, I felt a strange calmness, not a full reconciliation. Too much water had passed, too many resentments had accumulated, but the beginning of something new, more honest and open. The next day, I called Bert Simons, my lawyer. Bert, I need to change my will again. Judith? He sounded surprised. You want the children back in the will? Not exactly. I need something a little more complicated than that. Can I come over to discuss the details? An hour later, I was sitting in his office explaining my idea. Bert listened, sometimes making notes, sometimes shaking his head. It's unusual, Judith, he said when I had finished, but legally feasible. Are you sure this is what you want? Absolutely. Good. I'll draw up the papers. But I have to tell you, your kids might be, surprised. That's the point, Bert. I smiled. Sometimes people need to be surprised. The new will was ready in 3 days. I signed it in the presence of Bert and 2 witnesses, his assistant and a notary from a neighboring office. That evening, I sat in my workshop working on a new project, a rocking chair, the most difficult thing I had ever tried to make. There was a knock on the door. Come in, I shouted, not taking my eyes off my work. It was Quinn, holding a small folder. Hi, am I interrupting? Never, I smiled. I brought some sketches for a tattoo, a few options for you to choose from. He laid out several sheets of paper on the workbench. Each one had a phoenix on it, stylized, geometric, traditional, minimalist, all different, but each beautiful in its own way. They're beautiful, Quinn. I looked at the drawings with admiration. You're very talented. Thank you, he smiled. Which one do you like best? I pointed to one of the sketches, a small stylized phoenix in flight, geometrically shaped but still recognizable. That one. It speaks to me. Excellent choice, Quinn nodded. When do you want to do it? How about tomorrow? I surprised myself with my determination. Before I change my mind. Tomorrow's great. I'll free up some time after lunch. After Quinn left, I sat for a long time looking at the phoenix sketch. A little bird rising from the ashes. Like myself, reborn after 33 years of a life devoted to others. Not giving up on my children and grandchildren, but finding myself anew. The new will was in my bag. It placed my house and half of my savings in a trust, the proceeds of which would be divided among my grandchildren for their education. A quarter of the savings to a charity for single mothers. The remaining quarter and my workshop with tools to my children, but with a condition. They must learn to work with wood, to create at least one piece of furniture with their own hands. If they do not do this within a year after my death, this part of the inheritance will also go to a charitable foundation. Is that an unusual condition? Absolutely. But I wanted them to realize what I'd found for myself. At least try. Not for the money, but for the connection to me, to something that was an important part of my new life. Our relationship wasn't perfect after that conversation. Winnie would break down and start drinking again, then go back to being sober. Thaddeus was still complaining about life, even though he was trying to be more independent. Lester was still too preoccupied with work, though he called more often now. But something had changed. They saw me. They saw me not just as a mother or a grandmother, but as a person with her own life, her own interests, her own principles. And that was the beginning of a new relationship, more honest and equal. And for me, it was the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter where I was not just Judith the mother or Judith the widow, but just Judith, a woman who, at 68, had found a new passion, new friends, and a new meaning to life, a woman who would never again sit at the children's table.